The ancient Greeks were very familiar with the concept of soul. In fact, it was something they thought about a lot. And in this episode, I'll share with you how their ideas about the soul ended up impacting early Jewish thinkers roughly 2,000 years ago. Hello and welcome to my channel, where every week we explore the ancient world and uncover the secrets of the past that continue to surprise us today. In the last few episodes, we looked at the role that Greek philosophy played in the development of early Christianity, and how figures like Philo of Alexandria used the works of Plato and the other Greek philosophers to reimagine Judaism for a Greco-Roman audience. However, while Philo understood how to use Greek philosophy to reinterpret Jewish beliefs, he wasn't alone in doing so. In fact, another Jewish philosopher living in Alexandria around the same time named Akiba ben Joseph, better known simply as Akiva, did the exact same thing with a slightly different outcome. While Philo saw the value in Platonism and Aristotelianism, he rejected much of what these philosophies had to say, picking and choosing which aspects of Greek thought he wanted to integrate into his own theology. But for Akiba and many of his contemporaries, this wasn't the case. Instead, they fully embraced Greek ideas and fully syncretized them with their own traditions. This process is often referred to as Hellenism, a term coined by scholars to describe the blending of Greek and Jewish thought that took place in the Hellenistic period. So in this episode, I'd like to introduce you to the fascinating world of Hellenistic syncretism and show you how Greek and Jewish ideas merged some 2,000 years ago. Now, before we get started, let me just say that when I talk about Greece or Greek people, I am referring only to the Hellenistic kingdoms of the Mediterranean, such as the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in the Levant and Mesopotamia, and the Attalids in Anatolia. The classical Greek city-states had been in decline for several centuries by this point, and most of the mainland had fallen under the control of Rome. Nevertheless, the cultural influence of Greece, especially during the earlier Hellenistic period, was still incredibly strong. So with that being said, let's go back to Alexandria, the jewel of the Hellenistic world. Like Athens before it, Alexandria was a cosmopolitan city, home to thousands upon thousands of people from across the known world, including many Jews. As the capital of Ptolemy's Egypt, it was an international hub for trade, diplomacy, and culture. It was also home to the Great Library of Alexandria and the Mouseion, or museum, which housed one of the largest collections of scholars in the ancient world. Now, as we mentioned in our previous episodes, the Jewish population of Alexandria was fairly sizable. In fact, some historians estimate that there may have been as many as 1 million Jews living in the city, making up over half of the total population. Most of them came from Judea proper, but many others lived throughout the rest of the Mediterranean, thanks to Alexander the Great's conquests. What's more, Alexandria was not only tolerant of their presence but actively encouraged it. Kings like Ptolemy II, who ruled over Egypt following Alexander's death, actively recruited Jews to live in their cities, granting them full citizenship and allowing them to practice their religion freely. After all, this policy of religious tolerance was actually one of the main pillars of Hellenism, which sought to blend Greek and foreign customs rather than destroy them. However, this does not mean that life was easy for the Jews. As a coastal city, Alexandria was frequently targeted by enemies of the Egyptian kingdoms, whether they be Roman, Syrian, or even native African peoples. And as such, the citizens of Alexandria had to fight to protect their homes. Now, while Jews were allowed to serve in the military, it was generally expected that free citizens would do most of the fighting. And since most Jews in Alexandria were foreigners, they were generally exempt from military service, forcing them to rely on the goodwill of their fellow Alexandrians. Furthermore, while the kings may have been tolerant of foreign customs, many native Egyptians and Greeks viewed Jewish practices with suspicion, sometimes even outright hostility. Things like circumcision and dietary laws were completely foreign to the Greeks, and they found them both strange and repulsive. In fact, Greek writers frequently mocked the Jews for both their physical appearance and religious practices, and this made life in Alexandria difficult for many Jews. Still, despite these tensions, The Jewish community flourished in Alexandria during the Hellenistic period. Not only did they establish synagogues and schools, they also engaged with the broader culture of the city. And nowhere was this more evident than in the realm of philosophy. You see, the Jews of Alexandria were highly influenced by the work of the Greek philosophers, especially the Stoics and the Epicureans. These two schools of thought dominated philosophical discussion during the Hellenistic period, and many of their ideas had a profound impact on the Jews. The Stoics, for instance, taught that virtue was the key to happiness and that one should always seek to live a moral and upright life. This contrasted sharply with the popular Cynic school, which had become quite popular in the late classical period. The Cynics, led by figures like Diogenes of Sinope, rejected society and its conventions and lived instead as beggars or outcasts. This way of life was appealing to many Jews who felt alienated in Greek society. However, the major philosophical development during the Hellenistic period was the rise of a new school called the Pharisees, named after the Hebrew word for separated ones. This group was a reaction against the growing influence of Greek culture in Jewish life, and they sought to preserve traditional Jewish law and customs in the face of growing Hellenization. While we don't know too much about the Pharisees during the Hellenistic period, it appears that they were a minority within Judaism as a whole, losing out to the rising tide of Hellenism. One of the ways in which Hellenism manifested itself was through the worship of Greek gods. Now, the exact nature of this religious syncretism is hotly debated among scholars, but it seems likely that many Jews began incorporating Greek deities into their own religious system. For instance, the author of the Wisdom of Solomon, which is part of the deuterocanonical books found in the Catholic Bible, clearly identifies the Greek goddess Athena with the Hebrew god Yahweh. Similarly, the author of the Letter of Aristeas, a Hellenistic work which describes a visit to the temple in Jerusalem, clearly identifies Zeus with Yahweh as well. This passage has unfortunately been lost, but we do have quotes of it preserved by other ancient writers. Another example of this syncretism can be seen in the development of the cult of the 7 bull gods, 7 deities associated with bulls. Now, these bull gods originated in Anatolia, but became quite popular in the Eastern Mediterranean during the Hellenistic period. They were a mix of Greek and non-Greek deities, and the Jews seem to have adopted them into their own tradition, identifying them with various figures from the Torah. For instance, the Canaanite god El, who was sometimes represented as a bull, became identified with Zeus. His consort, the goddess Anat, who was also occasionally depicted as a cow, was taken to be Aphrodite, and the Semitic god Pan was assimilated to Hermes. There's also evidence that the Jews may have worshipped the Greek hero Heracles, or Hercules in Latin, as a divine being. Once again, the exact nature of this identification is up for debate, but some scholars argue that he was conflated with the Hebrew Samson, while others argue that he was seen as an ancestor of the Messiah. Finally, we must discuss the Dead Sea Scrolls, which date back to the sect known as the Essenes, who were contemporaries of the Pharisees and probably had a significant overlap with them. One of the more controversial texts found among the scrolls is the Community Rule, a sort of guidebook for the sect outlining their beliefs and practices. And within this text, we find clear evidence of Hellenistic syncretism. For instance, the text identifies the figure of the teacher of righteousness with Elijah, the Hebrew prophet who was expected to usher in the Messianic age. Moreover, they also identify him with the Greek god Zeus. As you can see, Hellenism had a massive impact on the Jews of Alexandria, and their syncretic practices were widespread. Many of these practices never really caught on in Judea proper, but they remained common throughout the diaspora, forming the basis for what we today call Rabbinic Judaism. But what about outside of Alexandria? Well, the truth is that we don't have a lot of evidence for Hellenism outside of Egypt. In the Levant, the Seleucid kings attempted to force their subjects to worship Greek gods, but this was resisted fiercely, leading to revolts like the Maccabees. Still, there is evidence that the cult of the 7 bull gods was practiced in the Levant as well, along with other Greek deities like Zeus and Pan. So while Hellenism was not nearly as widespread in the Levant as it was in Egypt, it still left its mark on the region. What's your favorite aspect of the ancient world? And are there any places you'd like to see covered on this channel? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this episode and would like to support my work, please consider becoming a member. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.